Hello?
Hey, Saul, it's Penny. Congrats on getting your paint in the gallery. Bold choice to display it in a trash can.
The Critic is a short-lived adult animated sitcom that follows the life of film critic Jay Sherman. The series was created by Al Jean and Mike Reiss, who served as the showrunners of The Simpsons for seasons 3 and 4, and much like those seasons, the Critic makes frequent use of referential humor, movie parodies being its bread and butter. It's nearly impossible to talk about this show without bringing up The Simpsons. They share a lot of the same DNA, from producer James L. Brooks to several returning voice actors. You wouldn't be blamed for thinking that this is essentially an extension of The Simpsons. In fact, the show was originally conceived as a spin-off of The Simpsons. Matt Groening, the creator of the show, approached Gene and Reese to make a spin-off starring Krusty the Clown. They came up with the idea to make Krusty a single dad in New York, with a crabby makeup lady and a crazy Ted Turner-like boss. While the spin-off never saw the light of day, Gene and Reese would eventually repurpose these ideas into a new sitcom that would focus on a movie critic. While the two shows share a lot of history, they also share some key differences. As opposed to the intentionally indeterminate setting of Springfield, The Critic takes place firmly in New York City. The setting is very gritty and down to earth, complemented by the lush watercolor paintings that make up the background. The series is a real love letter to New York, with several details and jokes that people from the city would appreciate. And the Gershwin-inspired music is the cherry on top. Another key difference would be in its protagonist. As opposed to the dumb, goofy, and brash everyman that is Homer Simpson, Jay Sherman is a pretentious, snobby elitist. The show is more focused on the upper echelon of society than the average family, and while this may make the protagonist less relatable, Jon Lovitz brings a wonderful performance to his character.
My favorite subject.
Jay Sherman is a film critic who stars in a show called Coming Attractions. The show would be the primary provider of the cutaway-style movie parodies.
We left Kevin home alone, and he's only 23!
He is overly critical and elitist towards basically every movie on the show, frequently exclaiming,
It stinks!
As mean as Jay is to the films, it doesn't compare to how mean the show is to Jay. The show makes frequent jokes at the expense of him. These include jokes about his weight, his appearance, and his bad luck with women. The first episode even revolves around how a woman would only sleep with Jay if he gave her movie a good review.
You're short, you're fat, and even for a film critic, you're ugly.
There's also a lot of jokes about Jay being gay.
I just know there's something you've always wanted to do, but it seemed too frivolous, too daring.
I'm sorry, Jay. I'm just not attracted to you.
So there's that. Despite all this, there's still a lot of charm with Jay's character. Jon Lovitz gives his playfulness to Jay that alleviates the more caustic side of him. It's not unusual for Jay to embellish his dialogue, sometimes going so far as singing,
Well, since my baby left me, well, I found a new place to dwell.
He has a frequent back and forth with his own stomach, and no matter what he's put through, he always manages to bounce back largely unfazed. It's actually pretty inspiring. Jay is surrounded by a cast of quirky supporting characters. This includes his crazy Ted Turner-like boss, Duke Phillips. Despite his friendly southern charm, Duke is a ruthless CEO that cares only about his profits, and sometimes world domination.
All hail Duke. Duke is life. All hail Duke. Duke is life. All hail... Pigeons seem to like the sound of my...
His crabby makeup lady, Doris, who always has a cigarette in her mouth. Margot and Marty Sherman are his sister and son, respectively, and they both offer some humanity to the show, as they both seem to be the only people that actually cares about Jay. And Jay's parents are very eccentric, with his father, Franklin, being a highlight with his bizarre non sequiturs.
The peanut is neither a pea nor a nut.
There's also Jeremy Hawk, who serves as Jay's more successful and attractive foil, and Vlada, the callous owner of a restaurant Jay frequents.
You realize we never have children in this restaurant before. Except, of course, in the kitchen.
As I said, the bulk of the comedy in the show is made up of movie references and making fun of Jay. As such, a lot of the show can feel dated. It's a very 90s show. Even the intro is outdated. I mean, who uses gradients anymore? They regularly have jokes that involve impersonating and making fun of several actors and directors. Frequent targets include Arnold Schwarzenegger,
Sorry, that's not kosher.
Keanu Reeves,
If you poison us, do we not blow chunks?
and Orson Welles.
Full of country goodness and green penis. Wait, that's terrible. I quit.
It's also able to get well-known critics to voice themselves, such as Gene Scallop.
Even Satan himself would love this angel hair pasta. It's a goodbye. And so goodbye from Mr. Good Guy, Gene Shalit.
And more notably, Siskel and Ebert have an entire episode dedicated to them.
The way he said thumbs up.
The way he said thumbs down.
The way he said
goodbye.
Although the show can feel like a time capsule to the 90s, there are still aspects that feel relevant today. The show offers a lot of witty commentary on the film industry. Jay frequently butts heads with Duke about how the show should be handled.
Oh, your job is to rate movies on a scale from good to excellent.
What if I don't like them?
That's what good's for.
Duke is constantly reminding Jay about the low viewership that his show has, and his suggestions to gain more viewers usually involve humiliating Jay in some way, or having him be more dishonest. Duke is the manifestation of corporate interests encroaching creative pursuits, and making art worse to pander to the lowest common denominator. There's even an episode where Duke builds a machine that generates happy endings for classic movies.
What would the stars say about the way you're exploiting their images?
Why don't we ask?
Ah, I hereby release Duke Phillips, see? To use my face and voice in any way he sees fit for his marvelous new invention, Phillips Vision, see?
This feels oddly prophetic. The show lampoons the entertainment industry and how creatively bankrupt it can be. A lot of the spoofs feature absurd sequels, baffling decisions, and actors woefully unfit for the role. It's no wonder that Jay thinks every movie stinks. As cynical as they are, there is definitely some truth to these jokes. Hollywood largely treats film more as a commodity than an art form. As a result of this, a lot of the larger films are ones that try to appeal to as broad of a market as possible, leading to movies that are extremely safe and devoid of any creative vision. By no means is this a groundbreaking revelation. A good portion of the population has caught on to this by now. But it's still interesting to see how often the critic would accurately predict the future of the film industry. Being a show about a film critic, the merits of film criticism is a frequent subject of discussion. There are several jokes about how nobody respects film critics, and many find them useless, a sentiment shared by the people who think the Super Mario Bros. Movie is the pinnacle of cinema. There's a lot of hostility against film critics. I mean, it's expected when their job involves pointing out the flaws of beloved movies. In some ways, I do understand where these people are coming from. I myself love movies that weren't exactly critical darlings. But I feel like people can go overboard with their hatred of critics. There's a notion that the audience knows more about films than critics, and yeah, sure, keep telling yourself that. We have to realize that a critic approaches film differently than how the general public does. They've seen substantially more films and are able to articulate what makes them work or not work. And by watching more films, they tend to be harsher on ones that don't offer anything new or interesting. Also, the recent trend of streamlining criticism into a simple numbers game has really damaged discussions about movies. In the days of Siskel and Ebert, audiences would come to know a critic's personal tastes, and be able to judge whether or not they'll like a film based on how closely their tastes align. Boiling this all down into a numbered score has stripped criticism of all nuance, creating an us versus them conflict, where people become weirdly defensive about their opinions on movies. There are definitely problems with the film criticism industry. However, criticizing film is still important, otherwise Hollywood will continue to spew out uninspired movies unopposed. Or maybe I'm wrong. What was I talking about again? Alright, the second season of the show would take on a lighter tone. The art style even shifted to reflect this. Jay has been slightly redesigned to look more appealing. His eyes got bigger and more expressive, his edges got rounded, and he overall has a softer, almost cuddly appearance. Jay's design wouldn't be the only shift this season. There's also a major status quo shift in the show. Jay now has a girlfriend. Alice and Penny Tompkins are two new characters introduced this season, with Alice serving as Jay's love interest. The season overall is a lot nicer to Jay than before, and Jay himself leans more into his playful side. It also uses more absurd and cartoony jokes and plots. I mean, there's an episode where Jay's parents get stranded on an island because their pilot is a penguin.
Wait a minute. Penguins can't fly. Penguins can't fly!
All this leads to the show losing a bit of its edge, and I do somewhat prefer the more cynical first season, but the movie spoofs are still just as funny and the commentary is still as witty. It even contains the most referenced joke in the series.
And nothing of value was lost.
Of course, I should probably talk about the crossover, shouldn't I? Between seasons, the Critic would cross over with The Simpsons. A Star is Burns is an episode from The Simpsons' 6th season, where Springfield hosts a film festival, and Jay Sherman is invited to judge the films. James L. Brooks pitched the episode as a way to promote the Critic's move to the Fox network. Everyone on the Critic's staff was on board with the idea, but, with the exception of showrunner David Merkin, there was a notable hostility from the people working on The Simpsons, leading to the episode being mostly written by the Critic's staff. Groening in particular was a vocal opponent of this episode, going so far as to remove his name from the episode's credits. This is the only episode of The Simpsons without Groening's name in its 3-decade history, and his grievances would become known to the press. In response, Brooks stated, "I am furious with Matt. He is a gifted, adorable, cuddly ingrate, but his behavior right now is rotten, and it's not pretty when a rich man acts like this." Groening would explain, "The two reasons I am opposed to this crossover is that I don't want any credit or blame for the Critic, and I feel this violates The Simpsons' universe." The conflict left a bad taste in the mouths of everyone involved. Even years later, Groening would not appear in the DVD commentary track for the episode. It's clear that everyone is still bitter about the crossover. But how is the episode itself? This episode is classic Simpsons at its finest. So many iconic moments from this episode. Rainier Wolfcastle's
That's the joke.
the non-union Mexican equivalent of Steven Spielberg.
Senor Spielbergo.
Boo Earns.
I was saying Boo Earns.
All hilarious. And Barney's film, Don't Cry For Me, I'm Already Dead, is a highlight. It's all around a classic episode, and Jay's appearance doesn't detract from it. He naturally fits in. It just feels like he's another one-off character from The Simpsons. Even so, the episode will not be enough to save the Critic. Another key difference between the Critic and The Simpsons would be that The Simpsons would go on for 35 seasons and counting, while the Critic would only have 2. On May 21st, 1995, just over a year after it premiered, the Critic would get cancelled, despite the positive critical reception and increasing ratings. According to Mike Reeves, the primary reason for its cancellation was because the new president of Fox at the time hated the show and decided that it needed to go. But even without his involvement, who knows if the show would still last very long. It definitely deviates from the general formula that the average adult animated sitcom follows, but ultimately, what we do know is that the Critic would come to an end, the final episode being a clip show.
Good night, everybody.
It also got briefly revived as a series of flash shorts on the internet, a fate worse than death. The Critic, to many people, is just a footnote in television history, the short-lived show that crossed over with The Simpsons. However, it still exudes charm, and the humor is still very witty. There's a reason why it has a cult following, even to this day, and it's clear that the crew loved working on it, and John Lovitz is always ready to reprise his role, like that's ever gonna happen. The Critic is among the ranks of Mission Hill, Duckman, and Clone High, as an adult animated show from the late 90s and early 2000s that got cancelled before it could reach its full potential. Some get revived due to its cult following, but I doubt that will ever happen with the Critic. But if there's one thing that I'm sure of, it's that it doesn't stink.
Wait, that's terrible.
I'm 36 years old. I'm lonely. My hair comes out of a spray can. No, I had to go on camera without this stuff. Let the world see me as I really am.
It's empty.
Oh, I'm bald and ugly. Get more.
Why the hell do you have to be so critical?
I'm a critic.
No, your job is to rate movies on a scale from good to excellent.
What if I don't like them? It stinks.
That's what good's for.
Are you that loudmouth from Channel 67?
You're short, you're fat, and even for a film critic, you're ugly.
Indeed I am. It stinks. It stinks. It stinks.
Yes, Mr. Sherman, everything stinks.
Our test audiences find you cold, uncaring, and homely.
I'm worse than Hitler?
It's the most despised profession there is.
Have you ever felt like you're completely alone?
So alone.
The woman I love will be my best friend. We'll make each other laugh. And I'll never be lonely again. Her name will be Alice, and she'll have a sweet southern accent. I hope she'll love me too.
Now we gotta get to the gallery. Hope the garbage hasn't gotten there yet.